I like that Maya Angelou quote of, people may not remember what you said or what you did, but they remember how you made them feel. Everyone is out there just trying to figure it out. There's no perfect recipe on decision making. If you can walk away and say, hey, this year, there will be thousands of decisions that each of us make in our own realities and worlds. And if we can do that in a way that is collaborative and gives grace and is forgiving and challenges each other and pushes each other and all that stuff, we walk away 2, 3, 4 years from now being like, gosh, I liked working with that person. That was a fun chapter in my life, in my career, and I'm better as a result of it. That is the beauty of decision making. It is this forcing mechanism that brings us together to solve problems big and small.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Today is not about us, it's about you. So this is going to be jam-packed. Yeah. Tons of dad jokes coming.
We are right now laying the groundwork for who is going to be leading tomorrow.
This song is such a jam.
Ideas don't build multi-million-dollar businesses. It's the implementation and execution of those ideas that do.
Self-made can lead to self-destruction. You are successful at what you give attention to.
This is why I was created. This is why I was made. I was made to do this.
It's about how to build your playbook.
That was such an incredible session.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Inside the Process, the real-time podcast where we dive into all the best practices to help you continuously level up the work that you're doing.
That's right. And the way we do that is by bringing on the brightest minds, the best talent, the best thought leaders to share and discuss their insights and strategies on how to do all these things even better. So you get to be part of this. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring those throughout the session. We'll bring those up and answer those during the course of the session. We love to see those. Please participate as much as you like. We love to see it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Mallory, a 10-year systems and ops veteran turned marketer, and I'm here with Shawn, the super awesome training and dev guy. Around here, he's really known as Mentor Shawn. He's a man for the people.
Well, look, together we are your people and ops super duo, and we are your hosts for Inside the Process. And I am so glad you're all here, and I'm so glad to welcome Adam Lovill, who is the director or the VP of customer experience here at Trainual. So Adam, I'm going to turn right over to you, kind of share some little details about you and your journey here.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for having me. After that intro, I feel like I'm going to make some attempt for this to be a job interview for me to make this a trio and just ride on the coattails of you all's energy. This is great. Yeah, my name is Adam Lovill. I'm the Vice President of Customer Experience here at Trainual. I've spent the last 15 plus years working for a number of software companies in operations and sales and customer experience and customer success, and have led teams, small 2 or 3 person teams up to a couple of hundred. And so really love this topic and thinking about the role of decision-making at various stages of companies, at various stages of roles. I feel like I've seen interesting things along the way and have learned from a lot of great people and get to work with a lot of great people like the two of you. So stoked to be on here today. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And despite me getting to know you pretty well over the last year or so, I've been saying your last name wrong this entire time. So
it's hard. I usually tell people I'm like Lovill, like shovel, but then that catches people up. They go, Adam Lovill, because they keep shovel. And so like there's this hesitation. But yeah, Lovill. There you go.
I've been doing Lovill, like Willa DeVille, you know?
Yeah. It's like Jim Lovell, the astronaut who went to space.
Incredible.
You're French, Lovill.
Lovill. I do like the Cruella DeVille.
Well, let me just say that I think you have killer instincts and a way of making our team feel at ease, feel like they can trust you to come to you with challenges and know that they're truly going to walk away with solid insights. It's something that I think is so appreciated by our team and probably by your entrepreneur kiddos too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And if one of them were to come to you today and say, hey, Adam, how can I become a better decision maker? What would you say your go-to framework is? And has your style somewhat changed over the course of your journey, or has that always been sort of a natural instinct for you?
Yeah, very few things come naturally to me, like walking, eating, breathing. Beyond that, it's all a labor of love.
I think people just took like a big sigh of relief.
Yeah, I mean, there's a mindset to be in when it comes to decision making, first and foremost. And in decision making, like defined, is making a choice between a number of different choices. And so there's this big part of decision making, which it's almost more important for what you are not going to do versus what you are going to do. A lot of times people are like, how do I choose the winner? And they spend all this time like trying to choose the winner. But if I'm looking across 2, 4, 5, 6 different options, it's actually a bigger exercise of choosing what not to do. And I think if you go into decision making with that mindset and framework, it actually really piques your curiosity. And you go in very purposefully trying to understand what all of the options are that you're not going to choose. One of the evolutions of me and my career was I used to go on this hunt for validation of what I thought was the right solution versus evaluation, where it was choosing and selecting across a spectrum of different options. And I think that's a pitfall, and I still run into that pitfall now, where you have a winner in your mind and is simply going around and shopping that winner to other people to make them validate that it's a winner. That's not good decision making, right? That's like just going with what you think is right. I think decision making starts with good curiosity and asking questions and learning all the different options and then choosing what not to do. And what is left is the clear winner of where you want to go forward with.
I love that. And you said that you sort of review these decisions and figure out which ones not to do. Is there maybe a process that you go through or like a brainstorming dump that happens for you to come up with that list? Is there like a good practice that people should follow?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that you need to evaluate first. One thing I like to do is just assess what the risk or impact of the decision is, right? That will inform you on how many people you need to bring in the kitchen. Because decision making can be a real labor if like every decision you make has to involve 30 people. Like that's bureaucracy at its finest. And most good businesses are in a constant perpetual fight against that red tape and bureaucracy. So I think the first thing is understanding what is the impact of this decision and then who would be impacted by it. And so once I've assessed that, or even talk through it with people, like that's really good stuff for one-on-ones with your boss. You're trying to understand scope or priority, or does this align with goals? Like that's really, Chris and I will talk a lot about what I'm thinking about for our CX department and some of the priorities and initiatives. And he might say, oh, that's a really good one. We're doing something in partnerships. And so immediately I'm like, okay, let me brainstorm with our head of partnerships or someone else. So first is understanding that scope and impact. And then the second one, Mallory, you and I just recently did this too. Like I'm a really big fan of just starting up a document and collaborating on it. And what I found is that in that act of collaboration, in that act of evaluation, it becomes very non-aggressive in nature. So much of decision making is aggressive. Like you have to be this overly assertive person to make the right call and stand on top and say, yes, I made the decision. It's like, no, it's a real collaborative effort. And the more that you can put people's guards down about we are in a quest to make the best decision for the company or the best decision for the people who work for this company or the best decision for our customers, right? It no longer becomes this territorial land grab. And so I think the more you can identify who those stakeholders are who are impacted by the decision, bring them in early in a very free-flowing creative environment where any idea is a good idea. Now you've got a team, right? I talk a lot about like in conflict resolution, like there's this wall and there's people just like hucking grenades or whatever over the wall, fighting each other. When you two can get on the same side of the wall, well, now you're looking at the problem, right? The problem is over there. The thing we need to solve is over there. You and I are on the same side here. And so I found that the more you can just bring people in early to that ideation process, it will jumpstart it and make it truly a collaborative effort to find the right answer instead of, advancing an agenda or a hidden agenda or a very apparent agenda that you might otherwise have.
It's so interesting that you brought up the example of us collaborating, because without us even really like having any precursor conversations about decision making beforehand, I had a question from Jamie. She's our VP of marketing. And she said, well, what would you do in this situation? Because we had sent a bunch of plates that were like shipped back to us and they were like undeliverable. She's like, well, what should we do? And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, there's 100 different things we could do. And I referred back to your list when we were collaborating, where there were like a couple options on that list that were clearly wrong or like not the answer you would choose, but you still put them on there anyway. And it's like, you know, scrap community altogether because we were collaborating on community. And it's like, obviously, like we're not going to choose that one, but you just had like this big exhaustive list of possibilities. And so I did the same thing with her. And on the last one, I put, you know, do nothing and eat the cost, which was kind of like a crazy option, but it just shows that you really thought through every possible decision that you could make, which almost kind of, I don't know the way I would describe it, but it almost builds like trust or like assurance that we've thought this thing all the way through.
Totally. There's this thing that happens in business. That's so cool you did that too, Mallory. Thanks for sharing the story. There's this thing that happens in business is you get further and further away from the problem. It gets more and more challenging for the person who has distance from that problem to evaluate it correctly and make the right call. And so, you know, a lot of times what you might see is a C-suite member who has angst or hesitation about making a call because they're 1 or 2 or 3 levels removed from where that problem is. And I think the exercise that you called out, Mallory, actually does. It builds a lot of trust in the person. Like, hey, this person defended like the nuclear option of remove the CRM from CX altogether. Like, you know, we're not going to do it, but those are actually some pretty good pros and cons on why we might do that. And they really objectively looked at the risk of it. And on the other side of the spectrum, usually there's this like stay the status quo, which might be broken too. But, you know, so you kind of got your bookends that you judiciously, honestly, objectively, you know, laid out the scenarios. And then usually it's somewhere in the middle where you're going to find the right ground. But that really keeps you in bounds. It actually is a great signal to Jamie in this case or whomever that this is really well thought through. And, you know, now I feel a higher degree of confidence, even though I am removed from this particular problem, that we're going to make a good decision here.
I love that. So obviously you in your VP role and me more in the managerial role, we exercise like similar practices in these examples. But would you give perhaps different advice for decision making to a new manager versus somebody in a more like senior executive role? Or do you feel like from role to role, it pretty much stays the same and the problems just get bigger or the decisions get bigger?
Yeah, I had a CEO at one of my first companies and we were at this big leadership summit and someone asked a similar question like, gosh, what is it like to be CEO? He's like, look, we're all doing the same thing. The big difference is if I mess up, the company goes under. And, you know, I think there was something to that, which he was sending the signal that we're all empowered and have the tools to make decisions. I think it is the consequences or risk of some of those decisions might change in nature. Impacts one customer versus thousands of customers. It impacts $1,000 versus millions of dollars. But I think that the more we get in the habit, and this has been great as I went through my career, it has been an exercise of learning that decision-making process and starting to build intuition and seeing how it's made at different levels in the organization. You can learn things as an IC that will pay dividends as a VP, you know, like a frontline account manager who has just started their career and is like trying to decide if they should refund this customer or not. That could be the same decision-making framework that you use on should we make a pricing change on our products, right? And it's the same type of thing. Have we evaluated the options? What is known about this situation? What are the consequences of these different scenarios in which where we take? Is there anyone else that needs to be brought into this? Right? Probably some of the learning that comes in, like Jamie asked you, what do you think we should do here? Which are usually coaching opportunities or opportunities to collaborate. So yeah, I think that the process is somewhat similar. It tends to be just the risk. And I think as the risk increases, there may be some additional steps that get introduced too, right? There might be some more documentation, or you have to bring more people in, like an analytics team to evaluate the risk or create some models. And so There might be some complexity to make sure that we have all the right information, where you can lean a little bit more on intuition if the risk is a little bit lower. But generally, I think the process tends to stay pretty true, at least in its foundational pieces.
All right, Adam, it's confession time.
Uh-oh.
I want to ask you, what are some of the what not to do's in decision making? If you've made any mistakes yourself that you want to share, open book here, but we'd love to hear what you learned and what should we not do? What should we avoid doing when we're trying to make our decisions?
We've got 45 minutes left.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that enough time?
Yeah. All right. I think there's a couple of things. Several years ago, I learned this concept of the 3 spheres of influence. And I've shared that with a number of people here at Trainual and in coaching other things. And those 3 spheres, there's this like really big sphere, which is like the sphere of awareness. And then, maybe a third of the size of that is this sphere of influence. And then a really small sphere, which is your sphere of control. And all things in your life can be plotted to one of these 3 spheres, right?
Say them for us again. We've got awareness, control.
Yeah, there's awareness, and influence and control are the 3, and they kind of like all live in each other if you're thinking about a visual. And so at the awareness level, I can be aware of anything. I can be aware that I'm looking at a computer screen right now and that there's a light over there and, someone just walked by to the left of my office. Then there's these things that you influence, right? We collaborated before this on what should the topic be and what do we want to talk about. We were influencing each other about this podcast. And then there are things that we can control, like I can control what I am saying right now, or I can press a button on my keyboard, right? So anything in your life, you have this sphere of awareness, influence, and control. And I think when it comes to decision making, where people can get really hung up and where I've been burned a number of times in my past is when I make a miss on which circle I'm actually in. And I think I'm in the circle of control when the reality was I was either in the circle of influence or frankly, I'm totally distant from it. And it's just something that's happening here that I had no control over. And I see this in myself and I've seen it in others where people can get really bent out of shape when they think they were in control of the situation and they had nothing to do with it, or they misplaced themselves in one of those circles. And so that's one thing. And I think an important thing that can help people out using a decision-making framework is understanding who the decision maker is. Understanding if you are an influencer, sometimes called a stakeholder in that decision, or if you're simply someone who should be informed after that decision is made. And I think by properly placing yourself in one of those 3 circles, you can be in the mindset of, I know where I'm at, I need to provide my 2 cents here, or I'm going to sit back and wait. And I think there's this other thing that happens, which is you start to build a lot of trust around the process. Trust the process. There's the plug inside the process. Around the process and the people. We continue to use this discipline on our exec team here at Trainual of defining who the decision maker is. As a team, we call out who will be a part of making that decision. And a lot of times I'm not in there, but I know the 3 or 4 people are in there are going to rigorously ask questions to the decision maker and make sure we make a good call. And I'm excited to hear the outcome of that so I can get on board and go from there. Where I've been burned in my past is I thought I should have been in the room there. This is the second part. So the spheres of influence is one. The second one is understanding that there are very few hills that you should die on when it comes to decision making. And I've died on way too many hills that I should not have. And I think understanding those circles is, helps you not overly charge or try to defend a hill. The hills you want to stand on are the ones that are directly in your control, right? And the ones that you feel passionately about because you're in control of this decision that has a big impact on customers or really big impact on your team or your direct reports, right? And so I think understanding those circles allows you to be judicious in choosing how hard or not hard you want to advocate. And by removing yourself from decisions and understanding sometimes you're just aware or informed, there is this inherent discipline that starts to come of building trust. You have to trust others, right? And so the more you are okay not being in a room when a decision is made, and you are okay that the decision might be perfect or slightly wrong, you give a lot of latitude to people, right? And you start to realize, that whole concept of being okay with failure. No one is nailing this thing. We're all just trying to figure it out. And I think if you can step away and trust the people around you and recognize that we're trying to make good decisions for the company, for our customers and for our people, then we get it right a lot of times. Sometimes we don't. But this exercise of knowing where you're at, trusting the people around you, I think can really heighten your self-development and awareness of the decision-making process just within a company.
You know what I love about that is that is absolutely pertinent to wherever you place in a company. Whether you are exec team or brand new employee, understanding those 2 points that you just brought up, the spheres of influence and the hills to stand on, that is gold in terms of how do you develop yourself and how do you focus yourself in your role, whatever your role is in an organization. I just love that.
Yeah, totally. I know we're not in like how to advance your career podcasts, but I think there are these things when people get bent out of shape about a decision and, it's because they were in that influence or control. If you put yourself in the awareness circle, well, then it's like, man, this decision's going to make my job a little bit harder. Instead of attacking the decision, you can go at it with curiosity and say, hey, can you talk me through how we thought about this decision? What were some of the alternates that Mallory was talking about? What were some of the other options that we looked at in the pros and cons? Even then you might say like, I might have went left. You all went right. I might have went left, but I get it. Let's give it a shot. That employee advancing their career in that way is very different than every decision being an attack or a battle. And oftentimes it's that mindset switch and an understanding of where you fall in that decision-making framework.
I love that. So I think one of the things I could say that kind of sums up what you're talking about is that we're all hopefully leading with good intentions behind our decision making. And no matter where we're at in the business, we can all pretty much align on that, like I said, for the most part. But let's zoom out a sec with that in mind. And at the end of the day, most workplace decisions have some form of a tie back to the company goals. So not only are we moving forward with good intentions for our customers and for each other, but we have goals to hit. How do you make sure that your decisions are always pushing the company closer to those goals or to those metrics?
Yeah, great question. There's a number of ways that you can do this, and different companies do it different ways. I think this does start with really good top-down strategy, and it's the power of having a good CEO and a good exec team. And at Trainual, we use OKRs, objectives and key results. And so 4 times a year, we get together to do strategic planning. 2 weeks from now, we're going to do the second half planning. And we've set this trajectory or focus for the year. And halfway through the year, we'll make sure that that's the right thing to be doing. There's this discipline and evolution of that, at least at Trainual, that we've had too. We used to have several of these and it got a little convoluted and we weren't sure what to do. And so we now set a single objective. At any given time, we try to just have one single objective that we're trying to accomplish as a company. And then anywhere from 1 to 4 key results that will help us know if we're doing well on that objective. And at the core of that, what we try to accomplish and then disseminate through the organization is what are we doing and why are we doing it, right? And some of that ties back, you should have this real nice connective tissue to your company mission and to your company values. And so a lot of our exercise in our planning is around what have we been doing? What can we learn from the past? Let's remind ourselves of what our mission is. We always go through what our mission is in our exec planning sessions and, some of our North Star metrics and what we're looking to accomplish. And so it's this reset of years ago, we said we were going to go on a really, on this path. And there's always some deviation on it, but let's reset on that and then make a decision what we need to do. So a big part of that is having clarity on what your objective is as a company. And then every 2 weeks, we talk about the company as well, right? Here's what we are doing. Here's how we are performing against it. And there's this. So, I think that's a big part of it, right? As a company, you need to have a strategy. That strategy should be able to answer those questions of what you're doing and why you're doing it. The how gets into the tactics, which, I don't know if we'll get into today, but the what and the why at the very least. And I think there's this beautiful thing that happens when you set that and it's really clear and you communicate it frequently. There is infinite potential in your workforce to accomplish great things. Everyone's workforce is eager to go make things happen. Where people can get really frustrated is they put a bunch of energy into something, but it's not aligned with the goal. And now I just did this whole proposal on how we should do something new. And I think it's so cool. And I've seen this done. And you told me I was empowered, but we're going here. And this thing is like here, right? Like we're off axis. And so it's difficult. There's actually more energy and more challenge as a leader to redirect that person there, because that person feels like they just made a big investment and that they're not trusting all that. So I think it's this exercise of having good discipline around identifying your strategy and what you're going to do as a company, making that very simple and easy to understand. You should not need an advanced math degree to understand a company strategy or how it's being measured, and then communicating that with frequency. And now you start to see that infinite potential, instead of being dispersed shallowly in a lot of different directions, starts to get harnessed into that one direction the company is going. So for example, we at Trainual, we used to acquire and service kind of all customers in a somewhat similar fashion. And about a year and a half ago, we spent a lot of time, we spent our whole annual planning almost going through who our ideal customer profile was or persona was, right? Who is the best customer? What do they look like? What is their employee size? How do they use the tools? And we combed over data. And now a year and a half later, every 2 weeks, we still talk about that. And the needle is moving on our ability to target these customers and acquire these types of customers and better service them and build tools for them. And anytime we're doing something out of that, it also empowers people to raise their hand and say, hey, why are we doing this? Right? This feels a little off from the strategy, right? That is where empowerment comes in the workforce, when people are making decisions that are counter to the strategy that you had developed, right? And so you have this empowered workforce that can either amplify the direction that you're going, or are empowered to question authority or challenge authority on why we are going a direction when I am in an informed state about, what our strategy was. So I think I might have got at the core of the question. I might have gotten a little tangential there, but hopefully that gets at the goal setting and how to communicate and some of that.
Absolutely. I think that transparency is so helpful. And I think we see that trickle down at every level of the business into all the goals and things that we're working on. And we are able to bring up those things and have those tough conversations. I think about just like a small example, and I bring up this example because it comes up a lot in the marketing world. And we used to, in terms of our ICP, speak directly to the founder or like the super small business, the entrepreneur. And I came from director of operations, bringing on Trainual and Trainual's like early days to the organization that I was in. And I said, a lot of times the content never spoke to me as an operations person. And we have ops people and learning and dev people and HR people that show up on this call all the time. And I'm like, we're not speaking to any of them. But I'm able to like comfortably bring that up and say, hey, like, I think we should pivot this language because we're missing, our ICP now, because the team is so transparent about those decisions and those conversations, and it's able to just weave into everything that we do. Whereas if the executive team wasn't as transparent, we're just all going to move forward, still talking to, the founder and the entrepreneur, which nothing wrong with, but we're missing this whole other ICP that you all decided was our new ICP. And if that wasn't communicated in a really clear way, we're not able to execute. And I think about the spheres of influence and the awareness that we're able to create for our product now, because we all are on the same page with that decision.
Totally. And that's a fun place to work too, right? Where I don't have to ask for permission every time I want to do something small. I have the knowledge and I know the direction, and I like that you can really empower a workforce and reduce redundancy. I don't need two people in this meeting. I just need the one, because they know what's going on, right? And they're in the know as much as anyone, and they go make that thing happen on their own. That creates great cultures and empowered workforces and just high impact teams that, people want to be a part of.
Nice thing that strategic decision making is such an easy thing all the time, right? Okay, we got tough decisions that come up that are part of what we do, as part of the gig, right? So how do you approach these? When you come to this tough decision you've got to make, what's your road? How do you go down that path? How do you make that happen?
There's a lot of tactics you can use there. I think the first thing that I've learned over time is the role and importance of patience in decision making. I'm reading this interesting book right now. I'm almost done with it, called The Impossible First. It's by Colin O'Brady. I think it's the first guy to cross Antarctica, the first person to cross Antarctica totally unsupported. So he carries this 400-pound sled behind him, and has all of his food rationed and all that. And he's in blizzards and storms and all that. And I've been thinking about this concept of patience. I think about it somewhat frequently. Everything about that is like frantic. He has this compass in front of him. Sometimes he can't even see the compass. Like there's that much wind and storm going on. And every day his food ration goes down. And in many places he's out of a rescue zone. And so it's like everything is telling you, get to the finish line as fast as you can, or else that's it, right? But patience is not just this extreme push to get to the finish line as soon as possible. It's actually being in rhythm with the flow of how things are now. And sometimes that means moving fast, and sometimes that means moving slow. And it's been fun reading this book, thinking about how he grapples with things like rest days, which is a real challenge when you're running out of food and there's, this crazy blizzard going on and, you are the only person on the entire continent. Like, how do you justify, a rest day when those stakes are that high? But even in those types of extreme situations, you weigh the options and you make the call because you think there's a bigger and better benefit on the other side of that. And so I think there's this, when really tough decisions come in, a lot of our instinct is to just jump on it, right? And make that call quick. And, it takes a lot of discipline sometimes to just take a breath, right? And assess the situation first. And maybe it is, when you look at it, it's like, hey, you're a brand new startup and it's like, hey, we're going to run out of money tomorrow if I don't do something today. Yeah, you better get yourself in gear and go make something happen right now, right? Like that is super urgent. You need to assess the situation and act on it. But there are other times where it's like, look, maybe just a conversation with a mentor would be really good here, right? Let me go have that talk, or let me give my boss a ring, or let me go for a walk really quick and just move myself out of this emotionally charged state and think clearly for just a minute. And so I think that the tougher the challenge, the more pressure there is to do something immediately. And the more challenging it can be to actually take a minute and understand where am I on this patience frequency? And is this truly something that requires urgent action? Or do we wait and smooth things out, over time? We've had a number of times in our quarterly or annual planning where we thought something was the right thing to do. And we actually spent a lot of time talking about it. And there's this funky thing that can sometimes happen. It's like you get really excited about it. And then 2 days later, like no one's really talking about it anymore. Maybe you've had this too. You're like, hey, we should do this tomorrow. And then like no one wants to take ownership of it. And it's kind of this like, well, if no one's really that excited about it, like maybe in the moment we got super hyped up because, we watched a YouTube video before that got us fired up and then we decided we wanted to go make a decision. But by just letting some time go by, you realize, hey, we thought that was really good a couple days ago, but now I actually think we should sit on this for a while. We've had that with things like what products we should build or what our pricing strategy should be. We might have some conviction after a couple days and then we sit on it and we're like, let's just let this smooth out for a little and let's see what happens, right? So there's not clear direction there on when to move fast or when to move slow, but I think the tougher the decision is, the more important it is to have your full awareness and energy ready to channel into that decision. And I think people can get really tripped up by moving too fast, being out of focus, and just looking for a decision, but not the right decision.
I really love that. I appreciate that because I know personally, that's something I value, the patience needed. My excitement sometimes supersedes my patience at times.
Totally.
Right? I want to do it. I'm like, oh, this sounds great. Let's get this done. But you're right. I've experienced this multiple times and seeing that it's absolutely a valuable thing to take those steps back, percolate on it a little bit. If it's not a decision that needs to absolutely be made like right this second, to take those few days. And you're right. You have that initial like, oh, wait a second. Are all the pieces aligned for this? Do we need to get this right? Then you can make some more strategic decisions based on that. Yeah.
There are very few superhuman people out there, right? And oftentimes it is like one or two conversations, someone asks that question that you had not thought of. And it's like, gosh, that just makes a ton of sense. And now I think about this problem slightly differently than I did a couple hours ago. And that can make all the difference in a good decision or a bad decision.
I don't know if we have any other martial artists on the call, so drop it in the chat if we do. But people have heard me talk about this before. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And there's a belt ranking system. It's pretty easy. It goes from white to black, and there's not that many in between. But when you think about a white belt, most people will tell you they're spazzy, untechnical, and quick to tap. A blue belt is usually technical, but not quick to tap. A purple belt is very technical. A brown belt, so on and so forth, all the way to a black belt. They get slower, way more technical, and slower to tap. Because when they're in tricky situations, they're breathing, they're thinking, they've been in this situation before. And I thought of that analogy because I'm like, man, it ties so well into what you're saying, because decision making is just a labor of practice. Like the more decisions you make, the more comfortable you are when you're in a tricky situation or things maybe don't go according to plan. And so being a little scrappy and less technical when you're starting out is okay. Like feel the fear and do it anyway. And the more experience you have making those decisions, you'll get more technical, more patient, and be less likely to freak out if you're in a pickle.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, Mallory. Yeah, well said.
It's awesome. All right. So let's say you've made that difficult call, right? Now you got to break it to the team. So, which isn't always fun, especially if it's not something they were actually like looking forward to or expecting. So kind of like one of these dun 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 moments, right? So what do you do there?
There's a couple of things here. One, if you've worked your process right, you should have brought the right stakeholders in to understand all of those options, assess the pros and cons, and made the right decision. And yes, we're making bad decisions all the time, right? Look at hiring, for example. Like hiring is one part science, one part art. Like you're never finding, you're making good hires and bad hires. Same thing with decision making. But if you brought in, let's say you're making something, a change to the team or how our CX team runs a process, right? I will not be sitting in this office with a whiteboard making that decision myself, right? I'm going to bring in their manager. I might even bring in like some of the more tenured people on that team to get some of their feedback on it. And I'm going to assess those pros and cons of all the different options, right? The other nice thing that happens when you select a good stakeholder group is you start to get a level of commitment from that group, right? And there's a whole other topic on 5 dysfunctions of a team that you can probably get to, but getting to that level of, you got it. Yeah, nice. Getting to that level of commitment is huge in preparing to take something, live to the team, because you have the primary stakeholders, who are bought into this. Even if they may have dissented on the option, that's okay. Dissent and commit is an okay thing. I may have thought, again, that we should go left and we went right, but I understood the situation. I feel like I voiced everything that I needed to about that. I looked at the problem objectively and we went right? Let's go see what happens when we go right. So I think you get this commitment to the exercise. The next thing is having a clear owner and a measurement, right? And so if I'm rolling out, let's say we're like changing a process or a goal or something, right? I need to know that this manager is going to be the owner of this. And here's how we're going to check in on it. And here's how we will define success. And they're going to provide an update in their weekly update to me. And so having an owner and a way to measure success ensures that it's not this, a lot of decisions end up a lot of excitement and then it tapers off immediately, right? And no one talks about it. And so I think having an owner and a mechanism for checking in and having that mechanism be tied to some type of measurement is a great way to ensure that the inertia that you're building towards the decision doesn't like plateau or even worse, fall off, right? You keep that decision moving in a positive direction. The second one is thinking about the rollout to your team, which I think was a part of it too. This is like the duck analogy where, duck's feet are going like 1,000,000 miles a minute underneath the water, but above the water, it's like, cool, calm, and elegant. A swan's probably a better analogy. But, I think when it comes time to talk about it, I brought up the like advanced math degree. Like you need to think about the simplest way to communicate the change possible. And there's another concept, Occam's razor, if y'all are familiar with that. It's like the decision with the fewest amount of assumptions tends to be the right one. That is the message that your team needs to hear, right? They don't need to hear about all 7 different options that we looked at and why one pro was better than another pro or one con. Like, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And in its simplest fashion possible, here's what it's going to look like. And I think when you roll it out to a team, you've usually started to build out some of the hows too, because that's the important stuff of like, how is this going to impact me? That's the big question a lot of people have. What is going to change in my day-to-day? And I think the more stakeholders you bring in, going back to that, like if I brought the manager in and one of the senior members in, they can really help formulate some of that, right? I think we need to click this button when we're doing this process. And this is I'm going to try this out for 2 weeks, even better. You've done a semi-test with it, but the simplest, rollout possible to the team. There's a third and final and sometimes tricky thing. I talk to my CS teams a lot. There are different levels of conversations that happen. And, thankfully at Trainual, we've got a killer product and just like total kick-ass customers. And so most of what we have are just like, it's like a big high five session in our CS customer interaction logs. But not everyone is happy, right? It's not a like total utopia. And going back to those circles of control, I tell the team often, you cannot control customers' emotions, right? And it's not your job to control customers' emotions. They may have just had a crummy day and they're taking it out on you, right? That's okay, right? The more you get caught into that emotion, the more you're losing that battle. Your job and your places in that sphere of influence in that particular scenario is to hear the customer out and to help them solve the problem as best as you can, right? And I think some of this happens as you think about rolling out big decisions or change, that if you get caught up in everyone, if it's 2 people, it's a little different. If you have 20 or 30 or, organization of 100 or 200, everyone has to be on board with this. Man, you're going to drive yourself nuts, right? You have no idea what state people are in or how it's going to impact them, right? You work the process, assuming that you work the process and have evaluated things, you should have a pretty darn good decision that you're going to make. And if you're going out there trying to make everyone 100% on board and have the level of excitement that you have, you're going to end up in this vicious cycle of never actually advancing. You're just going to be stuck in the swirl of what's going on. And I think there's this, going back to the simplicity and confidence in the decision, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, right? And I think in doing that too, the more open-minded you are to that all decisions are not perfect decisions, you can build up this equity in a workforce that failure is an okay thing. And people talk about that a lot. But, the more that you can embrace the concept of, if this is wrong, you have my commitment to change it, right? And it might, let's define what wrong looks like. But I think where some people can get caught up is they spend hours of one-on-ones after a decision trying to tailor the message to every single person so they feel this is right for them. And I think it's like, look, we think this is a good decision for these reasons. Here's how we've evaluated it. Let's let the thing ride. And if it was a bad decision, man, good for us. We advanced our learning by 6 months by making this decision now instead of slow playing it, another 6 months. And if we hit a home run, let's high five. But I think all of that just takes this kind of, by knowing the circle you're in and removing ego from it all we're trying to do is make, it's the company, the customers, and our employees, right? And we're trying to balance, how do you bring those 3 entities together to win? The Venn diagram is never plotted perfectly in the middle of those 3. Something is always going to be slightly out of whack. It's like you raise prices, well, the customers feel pretty bummed out about that. Or we're running really busy and an employee has to work extra that night. The employee's not going to feel great about that, right? Or all these different things might put it slightly out of whack. But if you have this commitment to being open and transparent, changing things when they're not working, hearing people out, and a commitment to making, working a process to make the best decisions possible, you'll see progress, right? And you'll see advancement in your company, and you'll build trust in your teams, and your teams will start to trust the process more. And I think there's this kind of flywheel of goodness that comes out of all that.
You said something earlier. You said high five if we win, but I was sitting here thinking about it, and I think somewhat you're selling yourself a little short, because I think you're incredible at high-fiving people for the losses too, and saying here's what we learned, here's what went right, and they're always more willing and more excited to jump into the next decision or thing that needs to be tested because you champion them win or lose. And I think that's such an important thing for people to take away from this conversation. If they are key decision makers in their organizations is like making sure to encourage and uplift people when decisions don't go according to plan as well.
That's very nice of you. Thanks, Mallory. I think about, some of it's the like, is that the hill you want to be on? And the other thing is like, I like that Maya Angelou quote of, people may not remember what you said or what you did, but they remember how you made them feel. Everyone is out there just trying to figure it out. There is no perfect recipe. Even today, there's no perfect recipe on decision making. And if you can walk away and say, hey, this year, there will be thousands of decisions that each of us make in our own realities and worlds. And if we can do that in a way that is collaborative and gives grace and is forgiving and challenges each other, and pushes each other and all that stuff, we walk away 2, 3, 4 years from now being like, gosh, I liked working with that person, right? That was a fun chapter in my life, in my career, and I'm better as a result of it. That is the beauty of decision making. It is this forcing mechanism that brings us together to solve problems big and small. And really the only thing we have is this choice on how we engage and interact in that process. And we can be militant or stiff or bring our egos to the table and, call a decision mine and I told you so or whatever. Or you go in open-minded and you like, no matter how far you are in your career, you realize you have something to learn from people and you were truly on a quest to make the best decision, whether it's yours or someone else's, right? And I think that's just such a fun part of work for me is that decision-making allows me to work with the people I work with every day and some people I don't work with too often. And it is this forcing mechanism that allows for interpersonal relationships and just fun business to happen. And I think hopefully at the end of all that, you walk away with these feelings like we solved some really cool stuff and business doesn't have to be as cutthroat as some people think it is. It can be direct and it could be difficult, but it can also be a place where you treat people with the utmost respect and care for each other and look out for each other and champion each other and you've got each other's back. And I think that's a neat thing at Trainual. I think that the team here has embraced and, just a fun part of everyone advancing their careers and thinking about, the role that you play in building something.
Love it. Okay, I want to fast forward to the finish line here. Okay?
All right.
So the results are in. And it's time to show off what came of the decision that you've made, right? Or that you have made collaboratively. It's something I want to touch on a little bit. But this is something, Adam, that I've observed you as you being my direct manager and as being our VP. And this is something you do ridiculously well. And that is taking those results and showing them off and saying, hey, here's what we did, right? So what's your advice for showcasing the impact and telling the story that's behind the numbers? Because me, like numbers go over my head, but the stories that those numbers represent is so valuable, helps me see the real, like, yes, we made something happen that was great. How do you do that so effectively?
Thanks for the compliment. It may depend on who you're talking to, how effective it is. I actually think the more boring you are, the better it works. Like I am a broken record every time I get the mic at an all hands or our CX weekly sync. I close every quarterly all hands with the exact same Charles Darwin quote. I close every all hands with the 4 steps that we need to take to, impact the metric that I own right now. I tell the same story over and over and over again. And I think it may not be as dynamic as some other people, but there's a few things that happen. Like people start to understand that story, especially people that are 1 or 2 layers removed from the problems that I'm working on. It is tough to keep up with what's going on in a business. Like I can barely keep track of my to-do list, let alone everything else that's going on. And so I think once you make a decision on something you want to do, 1, people don't need to be brought into every decision that I have going on, right? Be super, super judicious on what stories you want to tell and tell them over and over and over again, right? Because, Mallory in marketing or Kelsey in finance, they have the capacity to follow like 1 or 2 things that are going on in my part of the business. And so, to me, it's like, choose which story it is that you're going to tell and just keep repeating it over and over and over. And when it's good, tell people it's good. And when it's bad, tell people it's bad. Like, that's the other kind of tough thing where people always just tell the good story. And I think it like gets even more convoluted to people like, wait, what are we talking about here? So I don't know, my approach to, talking about impact and things like that is keep it super simple. Like, you've seen my delivery. It's like 1 to 3 slides, max, usually just a couple of visuals, and just going broken record on it until the people really understand. Because then if you're doing that, the nuances of things that you're doing start to get accentuated. Here's the metric. Y'all have been following this for months now. We went up, this is good. Up is always good. We all like up. Let me talk about the one thing that we tested. Right? Now I get a little pop from that part of the story instead of every week me doing like 10 different pops on, what's happening or what we've been testing. And so I think it's like boring that allows you to choose 1 or 2 things that, can raise people's eyebrows about, something cool that you're doing.
Yeah, well, for the record, I've never been bored. So
I was like, Adam's secret sauce, add a dad joke.
Yeah.
Be boring.
There's usually a dad joke in there too.
All right, now this is the $1 million question here. Okay. So what is the one thing that you wish more leaders knew about consistently making key decisions in their businesses, especially under pressure?
I might end where I started, which is decision-making is not a quest for validation. It's a quest for evaluation. And if more people thought about decision-making that way, egos get dropped, curiosity spikes, the questions you ask become the most important part of your job. I think about that often. Like, when I walk out of a meeting and kind of feel beat up, usually it's like, I just did not nail the questions right. And if you've ever been around a really great leader or a really great decision maker, they don't say much in the room, right? They're not like commanding the room. They're asking the question that pulls the right information from the person who is closest to that problem that informs the group about what we should be doing next. And so I think it's part of why, like, I think early on people can get caught up. Let me put a PowerPoint together about what we want to do. PowerPoints can be cancerous in decision-making process, because it is me telling you with a bunch of data why we should do this one thing that I have unilaterally said we should be doing. And everyone else, when they look at it, might be like, hell yeah, that PowerPoint was great, right? Look at all those great data points. But it had nothing to do with the evaluation of the other options. Decision-making is the process of saying no to many things and yes to one. And so, I'd say that's it. Stop charging after one thing. Really use your patience and curiosity and question asking to evaluate the spectrum. And that process will lead you to better decisions in the long run.
Awesome. All right, bringing us home. For anyone that's listening right now and they want to up their game when it comes to strategic decision making and execution, which is super important, where can they start right now?
I mean, I think a big one is asking questions. I recently read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, and reading it, I read it early in my career, rereading it now, it has become like every big meeting I go into, I've got a sheet of just a couple of notes I took from it. And it's so powerful because so much of it is around what questions to ask. When you feel like there's only one solution, there's actually a lot more and you didn't know. What is the tone that you use in your voice? Should you be using what or how or why questions? And so it's a real powerful philosophical book, but it gives some awesome tactics on how to think about what questions to ask when and how. And so there's many places to start, but that one's been really influential on me, especially in this past year.
Awesome. Well, I feel like there are so many things to take away from this session. So thank you so much for being here with us and for your time today. Because we covered a lot of information, we partnered with Adam to come up with a decision-making strategy guide, which we're super stoked to launch today. So you will have access to that. We will share that so that you can implement all of these incredible practices in your business, in your life, in your decision-making. Anything else you want to add, Shawn?
One of the things, a key takeaway for me is how much collaboration is part of this whole process. I love that that's something you brought into this from beginning all the way through to the end. and understanding that. And this is actually, you all know I like to share a quote at the end of these. And here's one I want to share because you nailed it today. You personified this. Strategic planning is a process. It's not a product, right? So this thing you do is a process that you are constantly doing. So I love that you brought those points up there and really appreciate it. I think you need a mic. Do you have a mic you can pull up and just like drop it? Because that was awesome, Adam. Thanks for being here. There we go.
Got my pin. Yeah.
Pin drop.
This is a favorite for sure.
Yeah. Thanks a bunch for having me. This was super fun. And if a third spot for podcast host comes up, just remember this session. And I'm happy to hang in the cleats on VP of CX and be a full-time podcaster with y'all.
There we go.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you on the next one.